Yudam Reves 10b. Okay. About 7-8 lines down. Toshma. When Bia works for Kiddushin, does Bia serve as a vehicle for Kiddushin and Suin together, combined, or like we traditionally thought, it's just like Kesef or Shtar. It just creates Erosin and not Nisuin. So the Gemara brought Abai and Rava both brought proofs. The Gemara was not satisfied with either one, and the Gemara is trying to bring another proof. Toshma. Yehudah ben Bagbag sent a message to Yehudah ben Beseral and Tzivin. He heard that Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseral says that an Arusa eats Truma, and he wants to know why. So Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseral said back, don't you agree with me? I know that I know that you're an expert in the chambers of Torah, and you know how to make a kal v'chomer. So why wouldn't we have the following kal v'chomer? Don't you know? If a kohen has intercourse with a shifcha, with a shifcha kananis, that would be a maidservant, an indentured maidservant, she cannot eat truma, because for the simple reason that bia is not a method of kinyan for a shifcha, and yet kaspa machilas of a truma. If the kohen buys her, that certainly gives her the ability to eat truma. Therefore, an arusa zusha biyasa machilas of a truma ein adin shekaspa machilas of a truma. If therefore for a regular married woman that bia intercourse does allow her to eat truma, certainly kesef should allow her to eat truma. And from there we see kesef meaning erosin. Avama said, what can I do? And Arusa does not eat truma until the rabbi said an Arusa does not eat truma until she has a suin, until she goes underneath the chuppah. Okay. Now the question is, in this brayser, Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira is taking for granted that bia would allow her to eat truma and kesef would not allow her to eat truma. What exactly does bia mean here? Hey Chidami, what's the scenario? Even bia sh'ayidei chuppah, the kesef sh'ayidei chuppah. Okay, if we're talking here about basically chuppah, meaning that he had bia with her and then had a chuppah. Similarly, there was kesef and then chuppah. In both cases, everybody agrees that you eat truma because it was a chuppah. Ve'ela b'bia sh'ayidei chuppah, the kesef sh'lo yayidei chuppah. We're talking about bia that led to chuppah and kesef that did not lead to chuppah. So the Gemara says, well, that's not a fair comparison. And the reason why bia works is because it's together with chuppah, because you had bia and chuppah. It's unfair to compare that to kesef, which did not have chuppah. Elalav, it must be the bia shelo yayidei chuppah, the kesef shelo yayidei chuppah. We're talking about bia and kesef without chuppah. Hold on. Now the question is, if that's the case, then they're both in the situation of erosin. Why is it that it's obvious to Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira that bia will allow her to eat truma, and kesef is included as well? Now, if you say if you say that bia creates nisuin, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense why Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira thinks it's obvious that bia allows her to eat truma, and kesef has to be included. why Bia would certainly allow her to eat truma, and Kesef sort of questionable. We have to include it. If you say that Bia is Kiddushin Isa, Bia just makes Kiddushin, then why did Rabbi Yehudah and Sarah think that it's so obvious that Bia allows her to eat truma? Maybe actually neither Bia nor Kesef allow her to eat truma. The obviousness of a statement that Bia allows her to eat truma presumably is evidence to the fact that Bia creates Nisuin and not just Erison. Okay, so that seems to be the proof. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, "La'olam ein malach b'bia sha'ayidei chuppah v'kesef shelo yadei chuppah." One second. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, "La'olam ein malach." There's no proof. Ein malach b'bia sha'ayidei chuppah v'kesef shelo yadei chuppah. The proof here is a scenario of bia with a chuppah and kesef without a chuppah. So you'll ask me that it's really it's incomparable. Bia sha'ayidei chuppah is two, so you have bia and you have chuppah. Whereas kesef, you just have kesef. Udike amrit, and that you'll point out, hachatarti v'hachachada. Bia has two advantages. Kal v'chaymer miya isi. There still is a kal v'chaymer. What's the kal v'chaymer? You can reframe the framework of the kal v'chaymer. And this is the kal v'chaymer. So we'll look at it again, and it's slightly there's significant variation here of the kal v'chaymer, but it's enough to include kesef even without a chuppah. What's the kal v'chaymer? Look at a shifcha kananas. She'ein biyasa machilasa v'truma afil aydei chuppah. In other words, let's say a kohen has intercourse with a mistress, with his indentured maidservant, and has a chuppah with her. She still does not eat truma. Yet kaspa machilasa b'loy chuppah. Kesef will allow her to eat truma without a chuppah at all, obviously, because you're not marrying her. Okay, so zu, a regular woman, Kain's marrying a woman, should be yasa machilasa v'truma ayidei chuppah, where Bia will allow her to eat truma with the chuppah, and adin shekas machilasa v'truma b'loy chuppah. Kesef should certainly allow her to eat truma without a chuppah, just like it allows her by Amma Avriya. Amma Avriya that does not have Bia and chuppah together does have kesef without chuppah. A regular woman that has Bia and chuppah makes her married, and she can eat truma, certainly should have kesef without a chuppah. But the rabbi said that we ultimately restrict the ability of an arusa to eat truma, a woman in a state of erison to eat truma until she has a chuppah. Okay.
Greetings, fellow thrill seekers.
Okay. I believe this is sort of the conclusion of the Gemara, which means that the question is still unresolved. Now, Rabbi Yehudah and Sarah is saying that you can't eat truma until why? Because the rabbi said so. The rabbi said that an arusa can't eat truma. Why not? Mishum de'ula, because of ula. We'll see ula in a moment. 1 second. Ula is because perhaps she will give to drink to her brothers or sisters. That's why we forbade an arusa from eating truma. Her brothers and sisters obviously are not kahanim and therefore ineligible. And because she's living with them, we don't want the foods to get confused, and we don't allow, for that reason, we don't allow her to eat truma. Okay. Umen bagbag. When Yochanan ben Bagbag asked the question, how come he didn't have this kal v'chaymer? Said shifcha b'kananis lo shayar b'kinyana, hocha shayar b'kinyana. Ben Bagbag said there's no kal v'chaymer. Why? Because by shifcha kananis, when you acquire her with kesef, you acquire all of it. There's nothing left over in the kinyan. Whereas by an arusa, there still is. She's still missing going to a chuppah. And therefore, it's not fair to learn kinyan kesef, the kesef that acquires a woman entirely, from the type of kesef that acquires a woman only partially. So therefore, they're incomparable. Ravina says, midiraisa mifshep shitulei, the ochla.
Where are we on the page? 10b.
Yes, and about 3/4 of the way down. First one line is Omar midiraisa. Ravina Omar midiraisa mifshep shitulei. Biblically, Ben Bagbag knew that obviously a woman that had Kiddushin eats truma. The question that he asked Rabbi Dovid Yehudah was only rabbinical. This was his question. So this is an alternative explanation. So the first explanation we said is that this has nothing to do with the question of how bia works, because we're talking here about bia with a chuppah and kesef without a chuppah, which is the type of kesef that that Shifra Kananis is acquired by. Obviously, there's no chuppah because she's not married. Ravina is offering an alternative. The question here was never about a biblical question. It was always a rabbinic question. And his question was as follows. I've heard that you say that an arusa eats truma and you're not concerned for a simfon. Like we said yesterday, what is simfon? Simfon is an invalidation. It's a very loose umbrella term. So, for example, like we pointed out, the simfon of a loan document is a receipt. A receipt invalidates a loan document. Now, in this case, simfon would be a feature which would make the Kiddushin a mistake. So, for example, let's say she has a feature that's particularly strikingly unattractive. So maybe he would have the right to say, "Look, I never realized this, and I would not want to get married otherwise." One second. Okay, and now Yechem and Bagbag's question to Rabbi Yehudah is, I understand that you say that an arusa eats truma, and we're not concerned of simfon. So obviously, an arusa sort of before they know each other very well. Before Nisuin, he would certainly make sure that she does not have any invalidating feature. That would be a sort of a physical handicap or something that's unattractive, etc. Because if he would find one, then what happens? The Kiddushin is retroactively null and void, and therefore her eating of truma is forbidden. So why aren't you concerned with simfon with regard to an arusa and forbid her from eating truma? So Rabbi Yehudah responds, you know the laws of Kal V'Chomer. Don't you know? A shifra kananis, you buy a shifra kananis, and you're not concerned of simfon. What would be an example of simfon? A physical handicap, maybe, and maybe there's some others. We'll get to it. Zu shabiyasa mechilasa b'truma, and it shekas b'chilasa b'truma. But lo'neichosh l'simfon. So certainly, with regard to a woman who you're getting married, we're not concerned for simfon either. What can I do? Sure. The rabbi said that an arusa is not a truma because of ula, that we're concerned that she'll feed her brothers and sisters. Okay. Now, Ben Bagbag who's asking the question is clearly not concerned for simfon. He's clearly not concerned that a shifcha would a master, a slave owner, maidservant owner would find some invalidating feature for a maidservant. So the Gemara says, okay, why not? in other words, why is it so obvious to Yochanan and Bagbag that there is no simfin, there is no invalidating feature when you acquire a maidservant? Meaning, there's nothing you could find that would negate the sale. So Gemara explains what are the possible invalidations. Imum and shibagoli, if there's sort of a physical handicap that is readily apparent, then he sees it, he knows about it. Imum and shibaseser, if there's something that's sort of unattractive about her, who cares? He's hiring her for work, not for he's not marrying her. He wouldn't care if she's strikingly unattractive. Okay. Let's say she is a robber or a kidnapper, then the law is higiu. Higiu means that is not invalidating, because when you buy a slave, you can presume that there's a high probability that your slave is a thief and possibly even a kidnapper. Kidnapping over here is not necessarily the kid part. It's taking somebody. My amrit. So what's the possibilities? Listam zuyin. Maybe she's an armed robber, or the she's been drafted by the king for military or national service. So then you're not going to actually get to use her because she'll be drafted. She'll be taken. Or in the case of an armed robber, she'll be arrested and should be thrown in prison. So Mara says, Hanu Kollel Islu. Those, everyone knows that this slave is sort of a draft dodger or a armed robber, and therefore people will know to stay away. And there's no concern here of something by a maidservant. So therefore, there's no Kal V'chomer is really not. Kal V'chomer isn't really much of a comparison, because the reason why a Shifra Cananis we're not concerned about simfin is because there is no simfin. There is no invalidating feature. There's nothing that can invalidate the sale of a maidservant. And therefore, that's why we allow her to eat truma right away. It's incomparable to a wife who would potentially have invalidating features, and that could negate retroactively the entire possibility of the Kiddushin. Okay, so the Gemara says, let's examine this. Bein lamar, ubein lamar, loy ochlo. Either way, according to Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira and according to the rabbis and according to Ben Bagbag, you don't eat truma. My benayu, what's the difference? The Gemara says, kibel mosar v'holach. Okay, according to Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira, the reason why an arusa does not eat truma is because of simfin. Maybe he will find her unworthy and negate the Kiddushin retroactively. According to Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira, what's the reason? Because of Ula. She'll feed her brothers and sisters. So Gemara says, what's the difference in the two opinions? Two possibilities. Number one is Kibel, where he basically says, with or without the blemishes, I'm not going to negate this Kiddushin. In that case, according to Yochanan ben Bagbag, she would eat truma. According to Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira, she would not eat truma, because she can still feed her brothers and sisters. Alternatively, where her father has given her over to the messengers of her husband. In that case, she's no longer around her brothers and sisters. So according to Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira, she could eat truma. And according to Yochanan ben Bagbag, because the husband hasn't yet figured out if he wants to marry her, maybe she still has some blemish, she still would not eat truma until he marries her. Once they get married, by the way, he is not believed to say that he was not aware of any blemish. He should have checked her out before he married her. Okay, next Gemara, a little bit easier. What was that?
Yay.
Go back to the Mishnah now. How much money do you need to give for Kiddushin? Kesef. First of three ways to acquire a woman. The kesef. How much kesef? So machlekes, right? Basil says a shava pruta, b'shava pruta, b'shava says dinner or b'shava dinner. My tamayu de Beshamai. What's the reasoning of Beshamai? Amar Bzera shekain isha makpedis alatzma of eina in miskadesh v'pachas midinar. Bzera says the average woman has sort of more respect than Beis Hillel and would demand a minimum of a pruta. I'm sorry, instead of a minimum of a pruta, she would demand at least a dinner. Okay, the problem with this opinion, though, is that obviously it depends on the woman, right? Amar le Abayas says to Zera, if that's the case, El Me'ata Bansid Rav Yanai, daughters of Rav Yanai. The captain and Avshayo, these are very privileged girls, and they have a lot of self-respect for themselves. For their Kiddushin, they're going to want a basket full of coins. Hachanami, would we say the Pashta Yoda the Kibbel Chad Zuzumeachar, Hachanami do have a Kiddushin? Let's say they accepted a single coin. Would we say the Kiddushin is invalid? Now, it's a little questionable because if they accepted a Kiddushin, ultimately speaking, they accepted a Kiddushin. The fact is that they didn't demand the full basket of dinarim. All they took was one. So Amar Lei, Sir Zera says, Pasha the Kibbel Loika Imna. I wasn't talking about, let's say they accepted less than that amount. Because according to Rav Zera, even Beis Shammai would agree that if she accepted less than that amount, the Kiddushin would be valid. What are we talking about? What am I talking about? Rav Zera's opinion is that the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is the kitcha b'lelia, where he gave a Kiddushin at nighttime, she couldn't see how many coins there were. Inami d'shav shliach, or we should point to shliach. What's the minimum amount that the shliach can receive? And the answer, according to Beis Shammai, is one dinar. And the truth of the matter is that with regard to the daughters of Rabbi Yanai, it would be a basket full of dinarim. Okay, so that's the first opinion of Beis Shammai. Okay, next opinion. Rabbi Yosef Amar, I think there's three more. There's three opinions. So this is one, and there's one more. Rabbi Yosef Amar Tamai Rabbi Shammai Kid Rabbi Yehudah Amar Avasi. I'm sorry, it's actually four more. Four. So there's two more. The reason of Rabbi Shammai is Rabbi Yehudah Amar Avasi, like the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. The Amar Yehudah Amar Avasi. Kol Kesef Amar B'Torah Kesef Tzuri V'Shal Devreim Kesef Medina. Okay, I'm not going to delve into the exact numbers here. You can look at the article footnotes for more details. But let's take this very broadly. When the Torah Torah has a requirement for kesef, for money, kesef means kesef tzuri, which is the more premium type of kesef. What do they translate kesef tzuri as? A good word. Tzuri just means with a form. It means that it's engraved.
Tyrian currency.
What was it?
Tyrian.
Tyre. Okay. Tzur is the city of Tyre. Okay. Interesting. And Kesef Medina, what do they translate as? Local.
Provincial. Yeah.
Provincial. Okay. So basically, when the Torah talks about money, we talk about Tyrian currency, which is, I believe, it's about 8 times the value. Yeah, it's 8 times the value of the Tyrian currency is 8 times the value of the provincial, the local currency. So whenever the Torah says you pay something, it has to be the minimum payment is a payment in Tyrian currency, not in provincial currency. Now, the minimum Tyrian payment is a silver dinar, and the minimum payment locally is a copper coin called a pruta. So therefore, because whenever the Torah talks about money, it's Tyrian. So therefore, it's the minimum Tyrian amount, which is a dinar. Okay, so the Gemara wants to address this point now. Now, just pause here for a second before we continue. There are two other versions of this explanations to Rav Ashi, which are on the bottom of Yud and Beis. Hopefully, we'll get there. For now, the Gemara is going to interrupt and take us on a side discussion on this general question. Is it the case that every time the Torah talks about money, it means Tyrian currency? which is very much larger amounts of money, over the local currency. So Gufa Amar Yehudah Amarav Kol Kesef Amar Torah Kesef Tzuriv Shalavrayim Kesef Medina. If the Torah talks about money, it's Tyrian. If the rabbis talk about money, it's provincial. Kollel, is this a general rule? Turn the page. Get Aleph from the base 11b. Okay, Taina. You will remember Ma'adim Miktsas, right? What is Ma'adim Miktsas? I owe you $100. You owe me $100. No, I already paid back 50. Okay, so what's the minimum quantity here of Ma'adim Miktsas? So remember, 1 pruta is sort of the minimal respectable transaction. You know, in America it would be the penny, but let's say you go to Israel, it's the 10 agorot coin, which is actually worth about 2 cents, 2.5 cents, whatever it is. Maybe even a little bit more now, 3 cents. If you have a half agorot, you can do a digital transaction. We don't do physical transactions. So that somebody has to basically forgive the loss in that case. So what's the minimum amount that we can have debate? Obviously, you can't be, if I borrow 10 agorot from you, we can't have a ma'adim miktsas here. Because less than 10 agorot, nobody respects. There's no such thing as 5 agorot. So obviously there's going to be a minimum amount, and the minimum amount basically is it's more. Let's see the Gemara. Gittin ishareu kesef akelim lishmar. Utnan shvuas adiyanim hatayna shtei kesef v'hayda shava pruta. There has to be at least 2 kesef, which is, I believe, the value of 4 prutis is the minimum claim, and the minimum admission is 1 pruta. Okay, now the question obviously is, hold on a second. This is money that the Torah talks about. Why isn't the minimum quantity for claim 1 dinar? In other words, the minimum, I guess the equivalent in modern terms would be something like, 8 cents or 85 cents, and the minimum admission would be, a fraction of that. Why is it that it's even less than that? It's a copper. The minimum claim is less than a dinar. It's 2 mois. So the Gemara says, "Hasam dummi de kelim, ma kelim shnayim, af kesef shnayim." 1 second. Okay. In other words, over there, the Torah is a specific reference to include it, a smaller amount. It has to be a minimum of 2 units, just like when the Torah talks about vessels in plural. Kesef is also the plural, so it's a minimum of 2 units. And the minimum is davar choshev, anything that people treat as significant. A vessel is something, the minimum vessel obviously is a vessel that people actually care about. It's not like the cover of a big pen, right? Maybe a big pen in the first place too, or whatever. What's the other one? Mead, whatever, whichever. What was that? Whatever company pens people use, nobody respects those pens. The minimum vessel that people will borrow and admit to is obviously something more than just a pen, a big pen. So similarly, the minimum amount of money is the minimum amount of respectable amount of money, which is two ma'a, which is less than a dinar. So avkelim davar choshev. I'm sorry. Makes davar choshev, avkelim davar choshev. Hold on. Sorry. The proof from Kalim is the minimum of 2 quantity of silver coin, which is the smallest silver coin, even less than a dinar. And then the opposite, just like money is, these 2 coins are significant, so too the vessels also have to be significant, as opposed to a big pen, which would not have a haidah b'miktzas. Okay. So the Gemara says, "V'harei ma'aser." When the Torah talks about ma'aser, it calls it kesef. You'd think that it has to be at least a dinar. Utnan haparat sel mois ma'aser sheni. Now the law of ma'aser sheni is that when you're redeeming it, you can redeem it onto prutos, very small coins, and then you can take all the prutos and put it onto a larger coin. So you keep the change. The larger coin is what you bring to Jerusalem. Evidently, you can redeem on smaller coins. You don't need to redeem on a dinar, even though the Torah calls it kesef. So Gemara says kesef hakesef riba. The word hey includes any type of money, as long as it has a form on it, as long as it's engraved, and that's why ma'aser can be redeemed even less than the minimum amount. The minimum amount should be a dinar, because the Torah says hakesef, any type of money, even less than the minimum amount. Okay, next one. Harei hekdesh. redeeming money for money that was sanctified for the temple. The Torah talks about redeeming hektish. It calls it kesef. You'd think the minimum quantity has to be 1 dinar, and yet we find we find that if you took $100 and put it onto a 10-cent piece, it's redeemed. The reason why it's redeemed, by the way, just as a complete side note, is because the concept of misattributing value does not apply to hektish. And therefore, if you misattributed $100 onto a 10-cent dime, then it would still be valid. That's not the point why it's valid. It's completely not the point. The point there is that it would work. You can redeem hektish onto minimum quantity coins. Even the Torah says the word kesef. The minimum quantity should be a dinar and not a pruta. So Gemara says hasanami kesef yalaf mi ma'aser. We learn from the laws of ma'aser that any type of coin works. Okay, v'ari kedusha isha. When it comes to marriage, Torah says, we're talking about here about money. By the field of Ephron, it talks about kesef. Avram Avinu gave kesef. What's the minimum quantity of kesef? A dinar. Utnana we learned name Rav Asi the Amar Kebei Shammai. Okay, so Rav Asi, who's an Amoira, he's a later generation, is clearly making a statement that only squares with Beis Shammai and not Beis Hillel, which is not logical because halacha follows Beis Hillel. So the Gemara is really answering Beis Shammai by making the statement of Rabbi Yehudah in the name of Rav Asi, but that itself is questionable. Why is Rabbi Yehudah giving a law that's just relevant to Beis Shammai and not to Beis Hillel? Okay. So the Gemara says, this resolution does not really fly to explain Beis Shammai, and the reason for that is because it's not exactly what Rabbi Yehudah in the name of Rav Asi said. What they actually did say was, Kol kesef amar b'Torah kesef tzuri, shaldavreim kesef b'Torah, kesef medina. When there's a fixed amount of money. So, for example, if the Torah says pay the victim, the young victim of a rape, 50 coins, that 50 coins is kesef tzuri. It's Tyrian currency. And the Torah says that if your animal kills a slave, you have to pay the master 30 silver coins. What's the 30 silver coins? A fixed amount. It's 30 Tyrian currency. Dinar. When the rabbis say a fixed amount, then it does not mean dinarim. It means kesef medina, provincial currency. And we'll explain that in a moment. My kamash malon. What exactly is the chiddush? Tanina, we learned. Chomesh shlom shalben. The 5 coins it takes to redeem your son. Shloishim shalavid. The 30 coins if a slave gets killed by your animal. Chamishim shalayis v'shalmafata. The 50 coins of rape and seduction of a young girl. Mea shal Maitzi Shemra, the 100 coins of Maitzi Shemra, a husband claiming his wife was adulterous during the period of Erison. Kulam b'shekel HaKodesh, b'manatzure. These are all the shekel HaKodesh, which is the equivalent of the dinar. It's equivalent of a dinar in Tyrian currency. The Shel Devreim and rabbinical payments, Kesef Medina, are fixed payments. I'm sorry. Stop. So you see here clearly that the mission clearly identifies that all the payments that are fixed in the Torah are all Tyrian currency, manatzuri. So the Gemara says you're right. That part of the statement is obvious. It's the second part that's not obvious. The Shel Devreim Kesef Medina, it's Shrichale. The second part of the statement, a rabbinical payment, is Kesef Medina, it's provincial currency. That is the main concept he was trying to say. The Loitnan, it's not specifically mentioned. For example, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Hatekel Chavera. There's 2 explanations of this. One is the guy took a shofar and quite literally blew it into somebody's ear. It's pretty painful. And alternatively, he hit the other guy's ear and he got like some sort of tinnitus or something. And he couldn't hear for a little bit. So the rabbi said it's sort of especially the shofar. It's more embarrassment than anything else. It seems to be a short-term, physical illness. And therefore they said, noisin leisela. You have to pay a sela. This sela coin is not 4 dinar, 4 dinarim. In other words, it is not Tyrian currency. It's sela of Medina, the provincial sela, which is half of a zuz. The Avdian Shidikar Lapaga Zuzah Istara, because the half a zuz is called as an Istara, which is the sela of the local province, the local currency. Okay. We'll stop here. Continue with the final two explanations of Bisham. I will continue with that tomorrow. Okay. Have a great day.